For millennia, seekers and scholars have really wrestled with these huge theological riddles. I mean, if God is all-powerful and all-loving, why is there so much evil?
And why does history feel so chaotic? It often seems like just a string of tragedies, not some grand divine plan unfolding.
Exactly. And maybe the biggest question of all, the one that's so fragmented, is what actually happened in the Garden of Eden? What was the real transgression?
These aren't just, minor questions. There are these deep, unresolved dilemmas that can make sacred stories feel incomplete, pushing the really crucial answers into this box labeled inexplicable mystery.
Well, today we're diving into a body of source material that claims to solve all of them. Systematically, it's the text that outlines the divine principle, or DP for short.
And to be clear, our mission in this deep dive isn't to look at this as a statement of faith, but to analyze its claim of structural coherence.
Right. The DP is the core theology of the Unification Church, and it presents itself as this comprehensive, logically airtight system that's designed to resolve those exact ambiguities in the biblical narrative.
We want to see how that logic is built step by step. We're essentially testing its internal consistency.
So if the DP promises to unify all these separate parts of Scripture and history into a harmonious whole, we need to trace that logic from the very beginning.
Starting with the problems it's trying to solve.
Okay, let's unpack this. Before we get into the answers the DP provides, let's lay out the three major gaps that, standard interpretations really seem to struggle with.
The first, and it's the oldest one, is the classic problem of evil. Standard theology often lands on human free will as the explanation for suffering.
Or that it's just part of God's unknowable plan.
Right, but for a lot of people, that leaves a huge logical gap, doesn't it?
It does. If an all-knowing, all-good God knew that creating humanity would lead to, say, the Holocaust or just perpetual war, doesn't that imply a flaw in the design? It feels like a strange trade-off, this abstract idea of free will for just monumental suffering.
Exactly. The explanation can feel a bit arbitrary. And that's a tension point the DP hones in on, the lack of a clear mechanism that really integrates God's love with the reality of evil.
Okay, so that's dilemma number one. The second one centers on the fall itself. If we accept the premise that Adam and Eve sinned,
the story of them eating a literal piece of fruit just doesn't seem to match the punishment.
Not at all. We're talking catastrophic generational consequences. The corruption of all human nature, separation from God, pain, death.
The punishment feels wildly disproportionate to the crime. If the crime was just, eating something you were told not to. A piece of fruit causing the entire human destiny to go off the rails. The mechanism feels weak.
And the sources point out that standard interpretations don't really explain how original sin is physically passed down. It often just comes down to a divine decree. God just declares everyone is now corrupted.
Right. There's no clear spiritual or even biological pathway for that corruption to be inherited.
And the third dilemma is about the incompleteness of Jesus' mission. If he came to establish the kingdom of heaven on earth, why is the world still, like this? Dominated by chaos and war.
Why is the kingdom of heaven, thousands of years later, still a largely spiritual or intangible idea for most people?
And what about the unanswered questions about his life? Why didn't he marry? Why didn't he fulfill that command to multiply and create a physical lineage? If everything was accomplished on the cross, why did the world just change?
These are the exact theological gaps the DP aims to fill by starting at the absolute beginning, with a systematic definition of God's fundamental nature. If you define God differently, everything else that follows has to change too.
So let's go there. How does the DP define God in a way that makes everything else fall into place?
It starts with God's core motivation, which it calls heart, or in Korean, jongong. This isn't just love, it's the deepest source of emotion, the absolute desire for love, and the pursuit of joy.
So God isn't just defined by power or knowledge, but by this passionate, yearning love.
Exactly. So creation isn't just an exercise in power, it's an act motivated by a need for reciprocal joy. To experience maximum joy, God needs a true object to share that love with: humanity.
That gives a logical why to creation. But the DP doesn't stop with emotion, right? It gives a structural foundation.
Right, through duality. God's nature is dualistic. It has an internal character, or seong-sang, and an external form, hong-seng. You can also think of it as positive and negative, or masculine and feminine.
And that's fascinating because the DP claims this duality is then reflected in everything.
Everything. From the positive and negative charges in an atom to the male and female in humanity. It connects the spiritual and the physical. They're two sides of the same coin, both reflecting God's original nature.
Okay, so we have a God motivated by joy and structured by duality. This then leads to the purpose for human life, what the DP calls the three blessings from Genesis. This sounds like the actual blueprint.
It is the roadmap. The first blessing is be fruitful. That means achieving individual perfection, becoming one with God's heart and will. It's about maturing your character.
So, personal integrity, mind and body aligned with God.
The second blessing is multiply. This means creating a true God-centered family through marriage, extending God's lineage and love into the world.
And the third blessing moves outward from that perfected family.
Yes. Have dominion. That means responsibly stewarding the natural world and establishing the kingdom of heaven on earth, the actual physical fulfillment of God's joy.
What's so striking is how that takes three separate commands from Genesis and weaves them into this single progressive roadmap. It links personal, familial, and global goals.
It completely integrates spiritual and physical success. And so the fall has to be defined as whatever it was that corrupted our ability to fulfill that specific three-stage purpose.
And this is where it gets really compelling. The DP's explanation of the fall tries to offer a concrete act that actually explains the catastrophic severity of it all.
The framework interprets the tree of life and the tree of knowledge symbolically. They represent Adam and Eve themselves before they reach maturity.
And the fruit.
The fruit is symbolic of the outcome of a sexual relationship. So the original sin wasn't breaking an abstract rule. It was a transgression that corrupted the very foundation of love and God's intended lineage. The sin was that it was premature.
Timing was everything.
Everything. The DP identifies the fall as a two-stage illicit sexual act. Adam and Eve were supposed to mature, get God's blessing for marriage, and then fulfill the second blessing. They didn't wait.
And who was involved in that first critical stage? It wasn't just them, was it?
No. The first stage involved Eve and the archangel, who is Lucifer, or the serpent. The archangel, driven by premature desire and jealousy, engaged in an illicit spiritual relationship with Eve before she was mature.
And that introduced a self-centered love, not God-centered love, into the picture.
Yes. And Eve, now spiritually damaged and fearful, then led Adam into the second stage.
Which was Eve and Adam themselves engaging in their own premature physical relationship before God's blessing.
Correct. And in doing so, they established a physical lineage that was corrupted from the very start by the archangel's self-centeredness. It was a direct violation of the second blessing at its core.
And this is where the logic really clicks into place. An illicit sexual act immediately explains the shame, the hiding, the covering of their nakedness that's mentioned in Genesis.
And Apple doesn't do that. That deep human reaction to nakedness and vulnerability makes no sense in that context.
And it solves that proportionality problem. A crime that corrupts the root of love, family, and the divine lineage is, well, it's logically proportional to the generational damage we see in the world.
It also solves the problem of inherited sin. Original sin is no longer an arbitrary decree from God. It's the inheritance of a fallen lineage, a corrupted bloodline passed down through generations, descending from the archangel's selfish love, not God's true love.
The problem of evil is now placed firmly on created beings who violated the principles, not on a flaw in God's design.
The violation corrupted the individual, the family, and their dominion over creation, a direct negation of the three blessings.
So if humanity established this corrupted starting point, how does the DP explain the long, brutal process of trying to fix it?
History, in this framework, is a purposeful providence of restoration. But because humanity chose the wrong path, restoration can't be instant. It requires something called indemnity.
Okay, indemnity. That sounds pretty academic. Can you break down what that means in a practical sense?
Sure, think of it like spiritual debt repayment. It requires symmetrical acts of sacrifice and obedience to reverse the effects of the original sin.
So if the fall was a failure or disobedience,
Then restoration has to involve countless symmetrical acts of obedience and suffering to reverse those original failures.
so all the cycles of sacrifice and covenants and suffering in the Old Testament, they aren't random. They suddenly become these systematic, necessary steps to pay down that spiritual debt.
Precisely. They are strategic steps of restitution to prepare the foundation for the ultimate restorer.
Which brings us back to Jesus. And the DP reinterprets his mission in a pretty dramatic way.
It does. The DP maintains that Jesus' primary mission was to come as the second Adam and fulfill those three blessings completely. He did achieve individual perfection, the first blessing.
And that's why he could offer spiritual atonement. But the physical familial part was left undone.
Yes. His ultimate mission was supposed to include receiving a wife and establishing a true family. That would have restored the physical lineage, creating children free from original sin and starting the physical kingdom of heaven on earth.
So he wasn't just a spiritual savior. He was meant to be the true father of a new, uncorrupted humanity.
But, and this is a critical distinction in the DP, the crucifixion was not God's intended primary will.
Which explains so much. It explains his anguish in Gethsemane, praying for the cup to pass from him. If the cross was the preordained plan, that prayer makes no sense.
The DP argues the crucifixion was a tragedy. It was a consequence of the disbelief and rejection by the people of his time. Jesus accepted the cross as God's secondary will, the only path left to provide at least spiritual salvation.
Because the primary mission of establishing a physical family had become impossible.
It was blocked by human free will and their failure to accept him. And this leads directly to the explanation for why evil persists, the distinction between spiritual and physical salvation.
Because he was crucified before he'd established a true family, he could only offer spiritual salvation.
Correct. He atoned for spiritual sin, opened the way for spiritual rebirth, but the physical root of original sin, that corrupted lineage from the fall, remained active in the world.
And that explains everything. It's the logical reason why suffering and war persist, and why the kingdom of heaven on earth didn't just happen. The restoration was interrupted.
It was left incomplete in the physical realm.
Which then logically forces the final stage, the necessity of the second advent.
It's the structural imperative of the whole system. The Lord of the second advent must come to complete the work left undone.
Not just for judgment, but to complete the physical mission.
Exactly. To marry, establish the true family, and finally restore the corrupted human lineage, bringing the spiritual and physical worlds into alignment at last.
And the sources are clear that followers of the Unification Church recognize Reverend Sun Myung Moon and Dr. Hak Ja-han Moon as those true parents who came to establish this true family.
And the ultimate vision is what they call Cheon Il-guk, the kingdom of heaven fully realized on earth and in heaven, a unified world where humanity lives as one family under God.
Which perfectly aligns with and fulfills that original purpose of creation, the three blessings.
So to synthesize this, the DP's core claim isn't really about new revelation. It's about profound internal consistency.
It provides these interconnected answers for the problem of evil, the fall, and the perceived incompleteness of Jesus' mission.
It offers a very coherent map for understanding faith and history, by giving a logical purpose to every single stage, from creation to the fall to the long process of restoration.
We've explored a framework where a profound tragedy, the crucifixion, is understood not as divine design, but as a result of human failure. And that really changes the calculus of responsibility, doesn't it? It shifts the focus from a preordained fate to human choice. This leaves an important question for you to consider. If historical progress relies on these specific, detailed conditions of restitution, these acts of indemnity needed to reverse choices made millennia ago, how does that detailed understanding of cause and effect change the way we view the importance of our own obedience, our own family structures, and our individual choices today?